Zilisch is in talks to join Junior Motorsports in 2025, and Bubba Wallace is expected to return to 2311 Racing in 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start to talk about Snapchat, as it was announced on Friday morning that Snapchat will sponsor Ryan Elst this weekend at the Chicago Street Course. Really big partnership and sponsorship for this organization. Alpha Prime's been able to pick up some pretty big sponsors over the years. This was no exception. The paint scheme looks incredible in my opinion. It's a really awesome partnership, and congratulations to Alpha Prime Racing on picking up the Snapchat sponsorship. It's a really big deal for them overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Red Jones Racing. Now, Red Jones Racing on the Xfinity Series race Saturday afternoon was able to cross the line in 5th place in only their second start in Xfinity. That is the second fastest team to reach top 5 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. The only one that's done it before is Hendrick Motorsports. Red Jones Racing got a lot of support from Stewart Haas Racing. There's been some talks that they can move up to the Xfinity Series full-time next year, and having a run like they have with Noah Grayson, who's been generally really good in the few starts we've seen with Red Jones Racing, is extremely and super impressive. So nonetheless, very impressive run from Red Jones Racing, and congratulations to them on a very solid performance. To see him get a top 5 is super impressive. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about overtimes. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race at Nashville Superspeedway, you saw a lot of the chaos and a lot of wrecks. And according to Bob Pockers and other reporters, this is the first time in NASCAR Cup Series history where we've had 5 overtimes in a Cup Series race. The previous record, I believe, is 3 or 4 a few years ago, and this is the first time in any of the 3 divisions that we've seen 5 overtimes since 2004 at, I believe, Gateway, that race at Gateway where I think Chad Chaffin went on to win the race and go to victory. A very chaotic and very crazy race that kind of ruined the race for me, unfortunately. A lot of chaos, a lot of wrecks. At least the cautions were legit. That did save the race a little bit for me. It wasn't a great race overall, but there were a lot of overtimes this weekend at Nashville Superspeedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Christianekas. If you watched the Truck Series race on Friday night, you saw Christianekas lead every single lap. He is the first driver to lead every lap in a NASCAR Top Tier Series race since Kyle Busch, I believe, back in 2014 at Phoenix. He's also the first driver in the Truck Series to do this since, I believe, either Ron Horton, I think it was Timothy Peters, back in 2012 at Bristol Motor Speedway, where he led every single lap. Christianekas had a dominant truck, and no one was really touching him throughout the event. It was super impressive to watch what he's able to accomplish and to do, and to see him lead every single lap of the event was absolutely amazing and super incredible. Congratulations on a fantastic run there, and so incredible to see him lead every lap at a Truck Series event at Nashville Superspeedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about 5 flags. Now, this week, while you had some other racing going on in other tracks, you had a late model race going on at 5 Flag Speedway. Both Chase Elliott and Kevin Harvick were in that event. Kevin Harvick was driving his own 62 Kevin Harvick Incorporated car, and he finished in 13th in that race. Meanwhile, Chase Elliott competed in that, and unfortunately, I think he went a lap down at one point and finished in 16th position. Overall, not a fantastic day for both those guys, unfortunately. I can't remember the guy. I think it might have been like Harrison Craig or something like that. Went on to win that race, or Trey Craig, I think, that went on to win and get the victory. Congratulations to him on getting that win. But not a great day for Chase and Kevin Harvick overall, but it was really cool and awesome to see both those guys go back and look back to local short tracks and go race there. They did have okay runs, but not great nights, all things considered, but at least they were able to do decent at 5 Flag Speedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Austrian Grand Prix. Before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place in Nashville Superspeedway, you had the Austrian Grand Prix as well. For a majority of this race, Max Verstappen completely dominated in the event, and it looked like he was going to go on to a pretty easy victory. But he put a different set of tires on about halfway through the race, and he lost a lot of ground, and his car started losing a lot of the pace and speed he had early in the event. This gave Lando Norris a chance and opportunity to go up there and take the lead. And Lando clearly had the better car at the time than Max. Max did everything he could to battle really hard for the win and held on for a little bit, but eventually with about 10 laps to go, Lando Norris sent it to the outside and made a huge move and got the lead. But unfortunately, they made contact with each other, and Lando Norris sadly got a punctured tire, taking both of them out of contention because Max Verstappen also got a 10-second penalty for that as well. This would shockingly hand the lead to George Russell, and George Russell would come off the final corner and win his second career Formula One race. What a topsy-turvy event. Very similar to the 2020 Southern 500 when Mark Truex Jr. and Chase Elliott were battling for the win and victory, and then Kevin Harvick came through and stole the win with a hard-charging Austin Dillon. A very similar race to that, a very chaotic race, and just overall just a really crazy race. Congratulations to George Russell on winning. It was a very chaotic race overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Hooters. Now, Diecast Charver does some of the diecast stuff, and I think some of the templates over the weekends for some of these teams, I believe, put out a very interesting tweet. According to him, it sounds like Hooters may no longer be at Hendrick Motorsports. Hooters has been with Hendrick Motorsports, I believe, since the 2016 season, sponsoring Chase Elliott when he joined up in the Cup Series. But if you notice on the car in the fire suit today, they were not listed on. Now, according to reports, they originally were supposed to run at Richmond, but I think someone posted in the comment section for Diecast Charv that they're no longer listed. If Hooters is leaving the sport, it unfortunately makes a lot of sense. According to what people are saying, they have been closing a lot of their stores. I think I saw a stat saying that 44 or 45 of their stores unfortunately have been shutting down, and some of that marketing money that has gone towards sports, it sounds like has been relocated to saving the company a lot of money as they have shut down a lot of stores. They've opened up some new stores in certain areas, but unfortunately they have lost some shops, sadly. Nonetheless, really disappointed to hear the Hooters no longer sounds like they're going to be working with Chase Elliott going forward. It is very unfortunate there because Hooters has been a really good asset, and hey, you know what, at least they finally broke that curse and got that victory with Chase Elliott, Texas earlier this year, but unfortunately it does sound like right now that it's very likely that Hooters will not be working Hendrick Motorsports in Chase Elliott. Really unfortunate overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Robert Wickens. If you were on social media, you probably saw that Robert Wickens got to drive a Formula E car this weekend at Portland International Raceway. One of the coolest things I've ever seen, and really amazing to see Robert Wickens get the chance and opportunity to run in an open wheel car once again. Back in 2018, Robert Wickens suffered a very terrible crash at Pocono Raceway. Well, he had a decent chance and opportunity to win some races during that season. And unfortunately, that wreck really sadly hurt him sadly. And unfortunately, he's not really recovered since, but he's been able to go out and race and drive for Brian Herta Autosport. And he's been doing a good job in the GT side of things. He was hopeful at one point to return to IndyCar. I'm not sure if he's ever going to get the chance and opportunity to do that, but I think this is one of the most triumphant and incredible stories to see, that we get to see Robert Wickens get the chance to drive an open wheel car once again. It's really exciting to see and pretty cool that he got the chance to drive an open wheel car this weekend at Portland International Raceway. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Frankie Muniz. Now, Frankie Muniz made his Truck Series debut this past weekend at Nashville Superspeedway and sadly finished in 31st. The reason he finished 31st was because of the fact that I think they had a fuel line issue and they had to go behind the wheel and go back to the garage. But he said he had a lot of fun racing in the Truck Series and he was looking for more confidence. Frankie had struggled in the Xfinity Series, made a few Xfinity Series starts earlier this year for Joey Gase Motorsports, and unfortunately the runs did not go well for him, and I don't know if he's going to be running any more Xfinity Series races in 2024. It was fun to see him back in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series once again, and I am really hoping for his sake that he can get back to Xfinity in the future. But a thing for me is that it's good to see that he's looking to restore his confidence, because a big thing for me is confidence is really huge for drivers if they do want to get better. So I'm really hoping that he can restore that confidence going forward, as he did make his return. Hopefully he can restore confidence going forward and maybe make a return to Xfinity in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Green. Now, Jeff Green was on the Dale Jr. Dallin very recently. If you haven't checked out the episode, I suggest you do because it was a very informative and very intriguing episode. But he revealed on the show that Austin Green is expected to drive for Jordan Anderson Racing at Bristol in September and Martinsville later this October/November. Austin Green has made 3 starts in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year with 2 top 10 finishes and 1 finish inside the top 15. Austin Green is the son of David Green, and he's been super impressive in the TA2 class in the Trans Am Series, and has translated to him having some really good runs. I do believe he's also going to be running at the Chicago Street Course this weekend, so I think he's going to have a good chance and opportunity for a very solid and good run this weekend with that organization, because he's been pretty good with Jordan Anderson Racing in the few starts. Obviously, he hasn't ran a lot of ovals in his career, but if he's like his father, I think he could be a serious contender and threat for some pretty good performances and really good runs. So I'm really happy to see that he will get the chance and opportunity to drive at Martinsville and Bristol with Jordan Anderson Racing. I think he'll do a very solid job. Glad to see that he'll get the chance and opportunity to drive with Jordan Anderson Racing at Martinsville and Bristol. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Faf Moffett. Now, if you watch the Craftsman Truck Series race this past weekend, you probably noticed that Faf Moffett was not behind the wheel at Nashville. Dawson Curran replaced him for this weekend and crossed the line in 20th place. Faf Moffett released a statement before the Truck Series race began. He said he's disappointed with the circumstances. He said the circumstances are unfortunately out of his control, but he is hoping to make a return next race at Pocono in a couple weeks from now. Look, I like Faf Moffett, and I think Faf Moffett is but let's be real and honest. You're the Nice Motorsports truck. You should be running a lot better than you have been running. And he's been struggling so far in 2024. The fact that Dawson Cram in his first start in trucks was able to go out there and finish inside the top 20, it shows that that truck should be running a lot better than it is. Dawson's not a guy that always sets the world on fire, but he did a very excellent and good job at the race. I don't know if he's going to be back anymore. There is a chance, and apparently Elaine Moore spoke to Mark Crystal from Front Stretch, and he had no comment on the situation. So there is a chance and possibility that he's no longer at the organization and team, which would be very unfortunate, but it wouldn't be really shocking or surprising overall if he is no longer at the organization and the team because of bad performance. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Nashville. Now, if you watched this past weekend at Nashville Super Speedway, it was very, very hot at Nashville Super Speedway, especially during the NASCAR Xfinity Series race. Multiple drivers like Riley Herbst and Noah Grayson had to go to the infield care center. I believe Ryan Ellis and a couple other drivers throughout the field decided to go to the infield care center because of the hot heat and the really high temperatures. This is your number 4 for Nashville being run in the middle of the afternoon for the Xfinity Series. And I feel like going forward, if we are going to have races at Nashville Super Speedway, these races need to be run late afternoon or in nighttime. We should not be running in the middle of the afternoon where drivers' cool shirts and suits are failing. It was very hot, very ridiculous. Apparently many fans that were at Nashville had to go to the infield care center to get IVs among other things. And that's just really unfortunate and really frustrating to see. I really hope going to next year, which I do think that there's a reason why I think it's going to go back next year. You can't have races this hot and run this in the middle of the afternoon and running at almost 100-degree temperatures is really hot for these drivers. I really hope this can change going to next year, but I do think there's a good chance it happens, and I really do hope it happens in 2025. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Clint Boer. Now, Clint Boer made his first truck start in nearly 6 years and his first NASCAR start since 2020 when he raced in the NASCAR Cup Series. He had a very high expectations going into the race, and unfortunately, he did not run very well, sadly. He finished in 17th at Nashville and just did not have a very strong run, unfortunately. He did run in the top 10 early, so he was getting a little better as the race progressed and went on, and was up as far as 9th or 8th position. But unfortunately, the run did not go very well at the end. He kind of done a ton of damage when he ran into the back. I think it was of Chase Purdy, his teammate, and got a lot of damage on the front bumper of his truck. Now, Clint Boer says he is hoping to do another truck race later this year, and it sounds like it once again will be with Faf Motorsports. Now, what race could he end up running? It sounds like it might be Martinsville in the fall. Clint Boer has been historically a really good truck racer. And like I said, I thought he was going to run a lot better this weekend because historically he's been really great in Nashville. Just look at his Xfinity Series stats. In the 9 races we ran at Nashville and Xfinity, or 8 races he ran, he had a 2.5 average finish and never finished worse than 5th. So I expect him to run a lot better, but I guess because of the lack of experience in recent years, it makes a lot of sense why he sadly did end up struggling in the event. I do hope that Clint gets a run again, though. And like I said, it sounds like he's going to run later this year with Spire, which is really exciting and fun. They've got that race on the schedule. They could run a 3rd truck, technically, because I think that Zilisch is going to be running that race in Martinsville as well. So we do expect that we'll probably see Clint run in another Spire truck, maybe like the 74 or something like that. Who knows at this point, but I really do hope that Clint Boer can make a return later this year at Martinsville. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about TV ratings. Now, over the weekend on Friday, we finally got the TV ratings from this past weekend in New Hampshire, also for IndyCar and Formula One, and they were not very good. For New Hampshire, it was 1.9 million viewers. For F1, it was 1.1 million viewers, and for IndyCar, it is 183,000 viewers. Not really good. Obviously, the IndyCar race at Laguna Seca was on CNBC. Originally was supposed to be on the USA Network, but because the Cup Series race got delayed, it unfortunately dropped off quite a bit, and it was just not very good. Obviously, IndyCar really doesn't care about, NBC doesn't really care about IndyCar much anymore, so they're obviously going to push it to CNBC and Peacock. F1 did okay, honestly. 1.1 million viewers for the Spanish Grand Prix. Not that bad, all things considered. Not great, but not that bad. But over 1 million is pretty good for Formula One standards in the U.S. The Cup race dropping to 1.9 million. It is disappointing, but it's not really shocking, all things considered. I think it was up from last year's race as well, which obviously was run on a Monday because of the weather. So I'm really not surprised or shocked to see that number being down quite a bit. I think it's down like 500,000 viewers from 2022, which again, that is really unfortunate. But again, it doesn't shock me or surprise me overall, to be honest, see these numbers down, sadly. I wish the numbers were up a little bit more than they are. But again, like I said, I'm not really surprised or really shocked to see the numbers not being that high from this weekend or past weekend. I do think the race in Nashville will be a little bit down too because of the weather affecting it, but those are the ratings from this past weekend and at New Hampshire and a couple other races in the world as well. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Lane Riggs versus Stephan Parsons. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at Nashville Super Speedway, the biggest moment of the race that happened outside of Christianekas leading every lap was the beef between Lane Riggs and Stephan Parsons. It started near the second half of the race with about 50 or 60 laps to go. Lane Riggs had a ton of damage on his truck from splitter damage and splitter contact on the racetrack, and he started fading back. Stephan Parsons was generally having a fantastic and very good run and was running inside the top 10. They both started having contact. It really started when Stephan got in the lane multiple different times. He got into him once, he got into him twice, and then eventually Stephan moved Lane up the racetrack. Eventually Lane Riggs had enough from the contact, and he got into Stephan Parsons, taking him out, basically sliding and spinning, and Lane Riggs would then receive a 2-lap penalty for rough driving. I personally think the call is questionable, and you hear why here in just a little bit when we get to the Carson and Harrison Burton drama. But Lane Riggs, in my opinion, didn't start the situation. He finished it, and it's not like Lane Riggs completely wrecked him a million times over and wrecked him into the outside wall. He barely hit the outside wall, got a little bit of damage. Lane, I think, got a little more damage than anything else. And again, that 2-lap penalty was just a little bit questionable. I know Phil was defending his son, because obviously Phil Parsons' son is Stephan, but personally, I think it was a little bit overkill. Now, there was a confrontation on pit road. They both got into it. It wasn't physical. It was a big argument that took place, and they both agreed to disagree. It didn't escalate more than that, but they were not very happy with each other, which doesn't shock or surprise me. Again, both drivers looking for jobs going into next year, most likely, because I don't know if Lane Riggs is going to be in the truck series with front row. He's been struggling at times, and it's just very interesting to see. I think both of them are going to be racing next week, or the next race at Pocono, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, Lane running full-time in the truck series. To me, I think Lane unjustifiably got wrecked there or was getting raced by Stephan, and I think Stephan really should have taken a little more responsibility for it. Again, I think NASCAR did go a little overkill in the situation, but that is just my opinion. Like I said, I think they did go a little overkill when it came to that overall, to be honest with you, with the penalty. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the wet weather tires. As in the media center this past weekend, Chase Elliott spoke about the wet weather policy that NASCAR has. And he says that teams should be able to make decisions going forward the next time we have wet weather tires in the Cup Series on an oval. I 100% agree with Chase Elliott. I really don't understand why NASCAR, after a couple times now, has not let the gloves off. I know that Adam Stevens kind of disagreed, and obviously they won the race at New Hampshire, so they're obviously going to defend NASCAR on that. But personally, I agree. I think when it comes to wet weather policies, among other things, you need to let the teams be able to make the decisions. Because I think it is going to make the racing better. And I think if you let the crew chiefs make the decisions for themselves, for their drivers especially, it's really going to make everything a lot better. Again, I really hope NASCAR lets it. We know Ellen Sawyer said very recently that they're planning to bring the gloves off and let the teams basically make the decisions going forward. And if the teams make a mistake and screw up, that's on them, and that's perfectly fine with me because it's a team's job to make sure everything goes right. And like I said, if they screw up and make a huge and bad mistake, that's on them personally. So I really hope that going forward into the future, they let the teams make decisions. Again, I do think they are going to let them make more decisions going forward, to be honest, but I really hope it starts happening because the teams, like I said, should be able to make decisions going forward. I really hope they start doing that in 2025 or earlier, which we'll get to Richmond here in just a little bit when it comes to options. But it sounds like if weather does come into play, the teams hopefully will get more options. Again, I 100% agree with Chase Elliott. The teams do need to be able to make more options going forward, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Richmond. Now, Richmond, there was a very interesting tweet that came out from Jim Utter, who works at Motorsports.com, and put out a very interesting tweet and was very, very vague. But he basically said a very key thing. He says that all options are available for Richmond Raceway. When I read that, I was like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by all options being available? Well, there's been a lot of rumors and speculation that Richmond is going to have the potential of using the option tire that was used at North Wilkesboro Speedway. Now, it really did not work out at North Wilkesboro, but you do have to remember that North Wilkesboro had a very new and smooth surface. With Richmond, the surface is extremely old, and the surface wears these tires pretty quickly. It wear it a lot during the Cup Series race. I think they lost 2 or 2 seconds of fall off, which made the race a little more intriguing, though a lot of the fishing really screwed up that race, sadly. I really hope that this is true, that the option tire for North Wilkesboro is coming in, because some of the teams did like what they saw and thought there was a good direction from it, and I think NASCAR can learn from this too. They could have brought it to other racetracks, which I think they should have brought it to Iowa, though I will say Iowa was a pretty fun race, had a lot of good moments, but the tires unfortunately stopped wearing as it went on and continued. Again, I don't know what options exactly that are going to be available and what exactly is going to be used by NASCAR. Maybe they use a rain tire option. Maybe they put sprinklers on the track to make the racing more fun. I thought the beginning of the race, when they had the sprinklers and basically the rain on the track, I think it made the race very fun and very exciting as a whole. So nonetheless, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens and what decisions NASCAR decides to make when it comes to it. But it sounds like an option tire is on the table, and we might be seeing that option available at Richmond in about a month from now, which I think is very fun and exciting overall, because I hopefully believe it will make the racing a lot better, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joseph Newgarden. Now, Joseph Newgarden was at Nashville Superspeedway earlier today, and he spoke about the possibility, once again, of wanting to drive a Cup Series car. He was an honorary official, I believe. I think he had an opportunity to maybe drive the pace car as well. But like I said, he's very interested in running in NASCAR. This is not the first time that Joseph Newgarden has expressed interest in wanting to race NASCAR. Remember back in 2018, 2019, he actually got the opportunity chance to drive at the Charlotte Roval because there have been talks and conversations at the time about IndyCar potentially racing at the Charlotte Roval. And now it sounds like he's very interested in getting in a Cup Series car. Remember, he just most recently signed a multi-year contract extension with Team Penske in IndyCar, and he's hopeful that he gets a chance to run in NASCAR going forward. The tracks he likes to run at are Nashville, Bristol, and also maybe do the double as well. He has expressed interest in wanting to run the double, and another driver to express interest in wanting to run the double at Team Penske is, of course, the defending champion, Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney has a little bit of that background. I think some open wheel background, I believe. And I think Ryan Blaney would gel very well and do an excellent and great job, potentially if he gets in a Team Penske car. Now, Joseph Newgarden obviously is a really, really good IndyCar driver, but how do I think he'd do if he raced in NASCAR? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I think he'd do a solid job, but I don't think he'd do a great or just amazing job overall. I think he's got a lot of talent for sure. I think he's one of the best drivers in America. And even Kyle Larson expressed interest in him, wanting to come over and race as well. So again, I hope it does happen. I want to see Joseph Newgarden race in the sport because I think it's really good for the sport if he does end up coming in. So we'll see what happens if Joseph Newgarden gets a chance and opportunity. Again, it's really up to Team Penske for him to get the chance and opportunity, and we'll see if Team Penske will let him do it in 2025 potentially, as I think he wants to do it next year. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, Kyle Busch spoke on Andy Petrie's retirement from Richard Childress Racing. And he basically said that he thanked Andy for a lot of the stuff he's done for Richard Childress Racing. But he's hoping for improved performance with Keith Rodden taking over. Remember, it was announced this past week that Andy Petrie would be retiring from Richard Childress Racing. The same day it was announced that Chase Briscoe would be going to Joe Gibbs Racing, and Keith Rodden is now become the interim competition director at Richard Childress Racing. Look, Richard Childress Racing has not had the pace or speed. We all know this, and it seemed like today, at least a little bit, that there was some decent pace or speed for Kyle Busch, especially at the end of the race, but they've been generally struggling over the last few months, and it just doesn't seem like they've got a lot of good of the short run speed or the short track speed especially. They had some good speed at Iowa, but Kyle Busch unfortunately had a mechanical failure, I think a fuel pump issue or water pump issue in his car. Gateway, they had top 10 speed, but they got into a debacle with Kyle Larson, who we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. They've had some wrecks they've been involved in. They've had some bad luck. And I feel like that with RCR, because now with Joey Logano going to victory lane, they're in a must-win position, and Kyle Busch and his team just don't seem to have pace or speed. At this point, you really need to be looking at 2025 and trying to build a program for next year, because we're expecting that Kyle Busch is going to be back at RCR next season. I'm hoping going into next year that we do see improved performance from Richard Childress Racing, and Kyle Busch can really help build them up, because we do know that Kyle wants to get RCR better, but it just seems like there's a lot of frustration with RCR currently at the moment. I really hope things can get turned around over there, and we'll see if the change of Keith Rodden going on, who wants to make some drastic changes over there. We're hoping that things can change and get better for this team going into the future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson versus Denny Hamlin. Now, if you've been paying attention over the last couple years, these two are always running up front. But these two have also gotten into a little bit of scuffles over the years. It goes all the way back, I think, starting in 2022, when Denny Hamlin got into Kyle Larson at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Then you go to last year. They battle really hard at Kansas for the win. And Denny Hamlin gets into Kyle Larson a little bit, though Larson did get a little bit loose. Then it transitioned over to Pocono, where Kyle Larson got ran up the racetrack by Denny Hamlin and got wrecked out of contention for the win of that race. Larson had finishing 20th when Denny Hamlin went to victory lane. And then you got to go back to this year. Denny Hamlin has been racing Kyle Larson not the nicest overall. And tonight, Kyle Larson finally had enough and stood up for himself. He got into Denny Hamlin multiple times, ran him up the racetrack, and at the end of the race, he tried to get in the back of Denny Hamlin to try to move him 3 wide to get the race lead for the win, and then Larson made a mistake in the corner and went up the racetrack and got into Ross Chastain, and Kyle Busch and other drivers got collected in the wreck. Now, both of them spoke to Bob Parkers and multimedia members after the race, and they really just chalked it up to hard racing. Look, I think both drivers do respect each other. I don't disagree with that. But I feel like when it comes to this situation, I'm glad Kyle Larson was able to stick up for himself. Now, Kyle Larson also tonight, there's no denying that he raced some drivers not the nicest overall. He caused Ross Chastain the wreck. That was his fault. He hit the apron and went up the racetrack and just got in the Chastain. Took out some really good drivers. He had the fuel issue that took Kyle Busch out of contention. It just seemed like anytime Kyle Larson was near Kyle Busch, except when they were battling for third, seemed like that Busch got the bad end of the stick. Going back to Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson, though, again, this rivalry is probably going to continue going forward between both these guys because both these drivers are always up front contending for wins. And I do believe that this is, like I said, going to continue going forward into the future. Maybe we see this at Pocono. I don't think we're going to see this at the Chicago Street Course where this kind of blows up in their face, unfortunately. But I do think that Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin are going to continue having a rivalry. We know Denny Hamlin's getting closer to the end of his NASCAR Cup Series career, but Kyle Larson is going to be around for a very, very long time, or at least for the foreseeable future. And these two guys want to go out and win another championship, or at least for Denny Hamlin's sake, he wants to win his first championship, and Hamlin's got a good chance and an opportunity to do that. We'll see what happens going forward between both these guys and see if more stuff comes from it. But right now, I don't expect much. I do expect that this is going to continue, but I think it's just chalking up to hard racing. And really, like I said, I don't expect much going forward into the future. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Hocevar versus Harrison Burton. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race like many of you did on this channel, you probably saw the feud between Carson Hocevar and Harrison Burton. So under the caution for the big wreck, I believe it was, or one of the bigger wrecks happened on the back straightaway, I think for Eric Jones, Carson Hocevar just runs in the back of Harrison Burton, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and dumps him under caution. Now, NASCAR did not penalize Carson Hocevar for this, but Harrison Burton was justifiably not very happy with Carson Hocevar for that. Harrison Burton got dumped under caution, and NASCAR did not penalize him. Now, according to what was reported by Bob Pockrass earlier this evening, there are penalties that sound like are expected to be coming down the line for Carson Hocevar, or if not, there probably should be one, because personally, dumping someone under caution is just not acceptable in my opinion. And Carson Hocevar should know better than that. He's been in the series now for almost a year, and he's basically doing the same stuff here that he did in the Truck Series. That stuff in the Truck Series will not fly in the Cup Series. I don't care if Harrison Burton has been struggling a lot this season. It is unacceptable to race somebody like that, especially when you're racing for a Rookie of the Year and you've been racing generally really respectfully on the racetrack and you haven't been causing a lot of controversy and you're doing what you need to do. But stuff like this will hurt your image. There's a reason why a lot of Cup Series drivers do not like Carson Hocevar. It's because of stuff like this. If Carson could just clean up his act and clean up the stuff going forward, I truly do believe that Carson Hocevar can go on and do a lot of great things, because we know he's going to be in the Cup Series most likely next year, while Harrison Burton probably won't be in the Cup Series. He'll probably be back in the Xfinity Series or just running part-time next year in Cup. We're going to have to wait and see what happens if Carson gets penalty. Personally, I don't think it's suspension, because I don't think he right rear hooked him, but I do think that there is a penalty going to be coming for Carson going into the next weekend. Again, I don't know if a suspension is going to happen, but I absolutely do believe that you're going to see Carson Hocevar receive a penalty for this, because you can't wreck somebody under caution. He didn't get a 2-lap penalty. We saw Lane Ritz get a penalty for that. He should have got a penalty personally, and I really hope NASCAR does penalize him. I know some will disagree, and that's fine and understandable, but like I said, I really hope that Carson Hocevar receives a penalty, because what he did, in my opinion, was very unjustified and very uncalled for, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Riley Herbst. Now, Riley Herbst is among many drivers that are looking for rides going into 2025. We know that Stewart-Haas Racing is going to be shutting down at the end of the 2024 season. And Riley Herbst, like I said, is looking for a ride going into next year. Now, Riley Herbst spoke to the media on Saturday about what his plans are currently for 2025. And he said, speaking to Series Time on Friday and speaking to media on Saturday, that he is still working on his 2025 plans. And he says he does have options to race in all 3 series in 2025. So he has options to race in the Cup Series, the Xfinity Series, and the Truck Series. And the reasons that Riley Herbst has options to race in all 3 series is because he has funding and sponsorship with the Terrible Herbst Company and also Monster Energy as well. So what potential possibilities could be out there for Riley Herbst going into next year? Maybe the Wood Brothers. The 21 car is still available going into next year. We know that Harrison Burton is probably going to be out of that seat. But I think it sounds like Josh Berry is currently the lead candidate to take over that ride. So I don't see him going over there in 2025. What about an Xfinity? Maybe goes to Joe Gibbs Racing, brings his Monster Energy funding back. We do know there's some drivers that could be on the move from that team going into next year, but I don't know for sure. What about Junior Motorsports? Junior Motorsports, they're looking for a new driver going into 2025. Potentially, we know some drivers could be on the move from Junior Motorsports as well. Who knows at this point? But I think the two most likely are the main option. A lot of people think that Riley Herbst is going to have going to next year is 2311 Racing. Rumors and speculation right now is that he's moving over to that team because of the Monster Energy backing, and it sounds like there's rumors, speculation that Riley Herbst's father bought a charter from Haas Racing and is bringing it over to fund for 2311. Now look, do I think Riley Herbst deserves to be full-time in Cup? Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. He's had a couple good runs on super speedways at Front Row and Ricker Racing as well. But personally, if you want my opinion, I'm not sure if he's quite ready to move up to a third car. And you look at another option you have. You have Corey Heim. Corey Heim, in my personal opinion, should be full-time next year. He outran Riley Herbst the whole entire day. I don't think that he's going to run top 15, that being Riley Herbst, in that seat. But if you got the funding, it makes a lot of sense, unfortunately. And I just feel like with Riley, I'm not a big fan of him potentially going over to 2311 when, like I said, you do have Riley Herbst that is Corey Heim that is an available option going into next season. I really hope they do choose Corey Heim, but again, the rumor speculation going on at the moment right now is that Riley Herbst is going to get the third C. There are rumors that Corey Heim could go over to Legacy next year. You're obviously not going to get Carlos or Kurt Busch out of retirement to take over the seat next year. But when I look at this move, I don't like him going there. Again, all options are available. I don't see him going back to trucks. I think it will either be an Xfinity or Cup, but it sounds like he's exploring his options, and I do think there's a really good chance of possibility that Riley Herbst is going to end up in the Cup Series next year. Do I agree with him going to 2311? No, but like I said, I do think there's a good chance and opportunity that he will, in fact, be in the Cup Series in 2025. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Josh Berry. Now, Josh Berry also spoke to the media about his 2025 plans. He is hoping to work with Ronnie Childers once again in 2025 as his crew chief, but it's so unclear at this point if that is going to happen. He is one of many drivers from Haas Racing like Riley Herbst and another driver like Noah Grayson, who we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, that is looking for a ride going to 2025. We know Chase Briscoe is signed with JGR for next year. But one team that we know Josh Berry is pretty much off the table of going to next year is the Haas factory team. He had been linked at one point to sticking around with Gene Haas and working with him going into 2025, and that will not be happening. We obviously know that Cole Custer is a front runner for that organization and seat next year. So where could Josh Berry end up going to in 2025? Well, he could return to Xfinity next year and go to Junior Motorsports and drive. He's got a good friendship with Dale Jr., and Dale Jr. really gave him the chance and opportunity to race in NASCAR. So that could happen. Or, of course, if Junior Motorsports makes the jump up the Cup. But I don't think that really is going to happen. The other two teams that I think are the most likely are Front Row and the Wood Brothers. Front Row, in my opinion, would be a fantastic option because I think both Ronnie Childers and Josh Berry will be able to work together next year. And I think if you bring Ronnie Childers into Front Row Motorsports, I think it's going to make that organization extremely successful. Because Front Row, they're building up a program. They're going to be a 3-car team next year. We know Todd Gillen is likely, well, we know because he signed a multi-year contract extension with Front Row Motorsports. But we do know that Josh Berry is in the running for one of these seats going into next year. The other rumored option is the Wood Brothers. According to reports, Josh Berry is the lead candidate to join the Wood Brothers next year. Originally, it was Chase Briscoe who was going to get the 21 car, but Chase Briscoe obviously is going over to JGR. We had heard at one point that Noah Grayson had been linked to the seat, but I don't know if Noah Grayson is going to get the seat. He does have a little funding from Bass Pro Shops, but I think there's a chance he does go to Front Row next season. Josh Berry would then be the next candidate. If you can get both Josh Berry and them to stay together next season, I genuinely do believe that both Josh Berry and Ronnie Childers are going to be able to do an excellent job together, and I think they'll be extremely successful. So I really do hope that Josh Berry and Ronnie Childers can work together going into the 2025 year. Is it going to happen? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you, but like I said, I really hope going into the 2025 season, we do see Josh Berry go to the Wood Brothers or another organization, because I do think he truly deserves an opportunity to move up going into next season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Noah Grayson. Now, Noah Grayson also spoke to the media about his 2025 plans. And he also said he has not signed anything yet for 2025. Noah Grayson is one of the top candidates out there remaining on the free agent market going into 2025. And there are a lot of teams and organizations that are interested in Noah Grayson going into next year. Among those options are Front Row Motorsports, Richard Childress Racing, the Wood Brothers, and I think even Rick Ware in 2311 Racing as well. Let's go to the least likely. 2311 Racing, I don't think is an option for Noah Grayson because I think that's either going to be Riley Herbst's or it's going to be Corey Heim's ride going into next year. I think that potentially a team like Rick Ware could be a decent option. They're building up their program, but they're expecting to look for someone that has a little more funding than Noah Grayson has. Then, of course, you have the Wood Brothers, and I mentioned this with Josh Berry just a minute ago, but that is also a potential option for Noah Grayson going into next year. But again, the rumor is that Josh Berry is in favor for that. So you're down to two organizations, and that's Front Row in Richard Childress Racing. I have been thinking maybe RCR was going to be the most likely option for Noah Grayson going into next season because RCR is a team that's looking to expand going into 2025. However, they're going to need a third charter. And they were rumored to be getting one of the Stewart-Haas Racing charters for next year. They could potentially still get one from Collin Racing next year. But I think it's going to be tough to do that because we know Chris Rice is interested in having a two-car team once again in 2025. I think Noah Grayson would be a fantastic option for RCR. There's also a chance he'd go to the three-car next year. But again, the three-car sounds like it's not going to be available because it sounds like that Austin Dillon is going to be back in that seat despite rumors of him potentially retiring at the end of this year. So if he doesn't go to RCR, what's the last option? You got to look at a team like Front Row. Front Row, he's a lead candidate according to Bob Pockers for one of the front row seats. And Noah Grayson in Front Row would make a ton of sense. I think Noah Grayson is an extremely great talent. He always gets the best out of equipment, and I certainly think he deserves a chance and opportunity to be full-time in the seat next year if he gets the chance. Again, it depends on funding and sponsorship, but Bass Pro sounds like it's heavily rumored to be coming over with him to this organization next year. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens in regards to where Noah Grayson ends up. I think he either ends up at Front Row Motorsports or he's going to end up at this other organization, RCR, in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Now, there's a big story that came out this past week about a rumor that kind of was rumored about an altercation that happened between Bubba Wallace and Eric Almirola. And it was confirmed this past week that Eric Almirola had actually been indefinitely suspended by Joe Gibbs Racing. Now, we do know that Eric Almirola is expected to make a return to Joe Gibbs Racing at Indianapolis next month, and he's probably going to get asked or later this month at Indy and is expected to probably get some questions about the situation. Now, Bubba Wallace was asked questions about the situation from multiple media members, and he said he was only answering one question in regard to that. He spoke on the altercation. He says he doesn't want to go into details, and he says he wants to make people images good. According to the report that Jordan Bianchi put out, it sounded like that Eric Almirola was the one that was the instigator in this situation, which is why Eric Almirola did in fact end up receiving the suspension he received from Joe Gibbs Racing. I'm not exactly sure what he said, and we're probably not going to find out exactly what was said. But I do think that this will probably be the last time that we are going to be hearing about this for a very, very long time. Because again, this had been rumored for a while that there was an altercation. Some thought maybe Bubba Wallace had been the original one that was the original instigator, but clearly was that it was Eric Almirola who was the instigator. And these two have not really liked each other for a very long time. You go back to 2018 when Bubba Wallace did end up taking over the number 43 car from Eric Almirola, who moved over to Stewart-Haas Racing. And then you go back to the 2023 Coke 600. They got into a shoving match on pit road right about the time they got back in their car. And then that's why I was a little confused about it. And I originally didn't think that the competition meeting happened to all the Toyota drivers. It turns out they all meet in pretty much the same competition meetings. As for the situation for Bubba, I'm glad to see he's kind of moving on from him. He says his main focus is his family. He said the shit is basically a month ago now, and he is hoping to move on from this situation going forward. Again, like I said, I do think that there's going to be more details to come out from this in the long-term future, and I do think Eric Almirola is going to reveal something. Bubba said this last year at the Coke 600, by the way, that Eric Almirola was two-faced, so we're not entirely sure how Eric Almirola truly was to Bubba Wallace, but we're probably not going to find out for a very, very long time. Eric Almirola is scheduled to still run at Indianapolis later this year, and he's also scheduled to run later this season as well at a couple other races, including at Watkins Glen, and drive the 20 car with the Gold Bowling sponsorship. Again, it'll be very interesting and intriguing to see what happens and what else comes out from the situation, but I'm glad to see that there was only one question asked, and at least Bubba can move on from it and focus on the playoffs. Again, it's interesting for sure. Again, a lot of people will instantly blame Bubba Wallace. I'll probably have some hate comments from Bubba Wallace haters, and we'll talk about Bubba here in just a little bit in regards to silly season. But right now, Bubba Wallace is going to basically not talk much about it and move on, and is going to focus going into the future of trying to get into the playoffs in the 2025 season, and he'll probably be back with 2311 next year in 2025 to continue building the program. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about Connor Zilisch. As it was reported by Adam Stern on Friday late afternoon to early evening that racing prodigy Connor Zilisch is currently in discussions to drive full-time for Junior Motorsports in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025, as he looks to move up full-time to the Cup Series in the not-so-distant future. If you continue to read the article, WeatherTech looks to be sponsoring a majority of those races in 2025, as Trackhouse is looking to move a little bit farther away from college racing and move Connor Zilisch to a better organization and team. Connor Zilisch, in my opinion, is an exceptional talent, one of the best gun racing prospects we have seen come through the ranks in a very, very long time. Remember, he is also making select starts in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year with Junior Motorsports. That first start coming at Watkins Glen. He's also going to run Homestead Miami Speedway. I think he's going to run Martinsville, and I think he's going to run Phoenix at the end of the year as well. I think Connor Zilisch is one of the best young prospects, and you look at just his racing resume at just a young age of 17 years old. Winner of LMP2 in the 12 Hours of Sebring. Winner of LMP2 in the 24 Hours of Daytona. Winner of karting championships in Europe. Has won multiple ARCA East races this year. In the 3 starts he's ran in ARCA, he's won 2 of those races at Dover, and I think at Iowa, though, was very, very controversial. Won an ARCA East race at Flat Rock Park. He probably would have won his Truck Series debut if he didn't make a major mistake there. He is one of the best young prospects I have ever seen come to the race. He has as much hype as a driver like Joey Logano had when Joey Logano was coming through the ranks. And probably all around one of the best talents in the world that I've seen come through the ranks since Kyle Larson. I get very similar vibes to Kyle Larson, except the fact that Connor doesn't have a lot of dirt background. But trust me, if you probably put him in a dirt car, he would be extremely successful with how much talent he has as a race car driver. And I think he deserves a chance and opportunity. Now, how do I think Connor Zilisch ends up doing in 2025 if he does get this ride next year? Well, I think he will be a championship contender. He's going to be extremely strong on road courses, and we know how strong Junior Motorsports is. It's way better than Call Up Racing, which had been rumored to potentially go into that team for next year. But I think this would be a fantastic ride to go to, and Junior Motorsports would be great to go to. So who does he end up replacing going into next year? I don't think he replaces Justin Allgaier. Justin Allgaier's got the brand sponsorship and funding. I don't see him going over there next year. Could he replace Sammy Smith? Potentially. Sammy Smith's in the running for a Cup ride from what I understand, but I think Sammy Smith will end up retaining his seat. What about Brandon Jones? I think this is the most likely driver to get replaced by Connor Zilisch. This is no disrespect to Brandon Jones, because I think Brandon Jones does have a little bit of talent. But let's be real and honest. If I compare Connor Zilisch to Brandon Jones, Connor Zilisch is a much more talented and a better race car driver who has much better racecraft. And Brandon Jones has been struggling. He was already on the hot seat going into this year, and he just really has not performed. He's had a couple good runs and performances and just has set the world on fire. Now, obviously, you've also got a driver like Sam Mayer he can replace. Sam Mayer, by the way, is in the running for a Cup seat going to 2025 with Front Row Motorsports potentially, so that could be an option as well for Connor, but I think most likely he ends up replacing him because there's also talk about Carson Quaffle potentially being full-time next year with Junior Motorsports, which certainly I want to see him be in the Cup Xfinity Series full-time with Junior Motorsports of how he's been performing this year. I think he hasn't finished outside the top 15. Carson has been super impressive. But going back to Connor Zilisch, the eventual hope for him is to be a full-time Cup driver with Trackhouse Racing, which is why drivers like Daniel Suarez at Trackhouse should be really concerned. Now, Daniel Suarez is expected to sign a contract extension with Trackhouse Racing, but if Connor continues to impress, and if he does super good next year at Junior Motorsports, Daniel Suarez is got to be really, really concerned about that, and he definitely should be because Connor is super talented. A team with Ross Chastain, Connor Zilisch, and Shane Van Gisbergen and Cup, I think that is going to be absolutely excellent. Daniel Suarez, like I said, very talented driver, but again, he's been struggling a lot this year and hasn't had the greatest performances, though Trackhouse, to be fair, has taken some big steps backwards throughout 2025. My expectations for next year, if Connor Zilisch does get this ride, I think he wins 3 to 4 races, makes the Final Four, and potentially wins the championship. There's going to be some open rides for next year. Cole Custer likely won't be there. Shane Van Gisbergen likely won't be in Xfinity. So there's some opportunity there, but he's still going to be competing against guys likely like Chandler Smith, Justin Allgaier, Sam Mayer if he does return, Carson Quaffel, among other drivers in the Xfinity Series field. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens, and we'll see how Connor Zilisch ends up doing. But like I said, I really, truly hope he does get this chance and opportunity, because I think Connor is one of the best young prospects in my honest and sincere opinion. I really hope he does a good job with JRM next season. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR silly season once again. Now, we kind of talked a little bit about this on the channel, and we're going to skim some stuff we already kind of talked about in this episode. But Bob Pockrass released an article and kind of reiterated this article right before the Cup Series race. And he talked about some potential moves in seats that are likely going to be filled up for 2025. Let's first begin with 2311 Racing. According to Bob Pockrass, Bubba Wallace is expected to return to 2311 Racing in 2025 and is expected to sign a multi-year contract extension with 2311. Some are going to question this move. I'm not questioning this move. Bubba Wallace brings a lot of sponsorship and he brings a lot of funding to the table. He's brought companies like McDonald's over from Richard Petty Motorsports to the team. And there's been even rumor speculation Hooters could go over to 2311 Racing into next season. He brings funding, brings Air Force, Columbia, among other companies, sponsor 2311 Racing because of Bubba. And Bubba has been a playoff contender every season since he's gotten to 2311. You get rid of Bubba, that is a bad move in my opinion. I do expect that he is going to get this seat. As for the third 2311 Racing seat, because Tyler Reddick is signed through at least 2026-2027, it's between Riley Herbst and Corey Heim for the second 2311 seat. I already mentioned this. Riley Herbst is a currently candidate for the seat right now, but Corey Heim also could get it. Corey Heim's performance today at Nashville was very solid despite the finish not being there. He did a great job. Corey Heim deserves seat and opportunity. Like I mentioned earlier, not going to get Kurt Busch, Carl Edwards, Eric Almirola, Chandler Smith, or someone like that to get in this seat. So I do think that it will likely be Riley Herbst or Corey Heim getting the second 2311 Racing seat. Let's move on to Trackhouse Racing. Currently, we already know that Ross Chastain has signed a multi-year extension and basically is already with the team for many, many years. Daniel Suarez is in a contract year, but I've already mentioned this a lot throughout the year. It's expected that Daniel Suarez is going to sign a multi-year extension with Trackhouse Racing. The question is going to be who gets a third seat, because we do know that they are going to get a third charter from Stewart-Haas Racing. It's between Shane Van Gisbergen and Zane Smith. Now, Zane's performance today in Nashville is going to help his cause to stay in the Cup Series. However, it sounds like SVG is going to get the third Trackhouse Racing seat next year. It makes too much sense. SVG's been doing a really good job in Xfinity. He's been consistent. He's only had, 6 finishes outside the top 15 all year. He just got his 10th top 15 finish this season, and he's been doing generally a really good job and only had 4 finishes outside the top 20. You cannot take Shane out of contention for that, and he brings sponsorship from Wendy's and WeatherTech, among other companies. I think Zane Smith is still going to be in Cup next year. Don't worry. I think he goes to Kaulig Racing next year as they're looking to be a 2-car team. Speaking of which, let's jump over and talk about Kaulig Racing. They are expected to be a 2-car team next year. This 16 could be a team with funding, maybe AJ Allmendinger, maybe Daniel Hendrick part-time next year, maybe someone like a Matt Benedetto or Ty Dillon. And I mentioned Daniel Hendrick because he's also not signed for 2025. Now, obviously, Daniel Hendrick does bring funding from Poppy Bank, but he doesn't bring the most sponsorship and funding with him. And if you've noticed, a lot of sponsorship this year has been from Kaulig Racing brands that have already been there. So I think that Daniel Hendrick will probably be part-time next year potentially, and I think Zane could take the 31 seat going into next year. Let's move on to RCR. Already mentioned this earlier. Kyle Busch is with RCR next year despite rumors of him moving on a team like Hendrick or JGR. Austin Dillon, he's expected to return to RCR. There have been some rumors and speculation about him potentially retiring at the end of the season, but it is expected that Austin Dillon is going to stay at Richmond Options Racing in 2025, though he could potentially retire at the end of next year, but remember he also signed a multi-year extension with the team. Let's move on to the Haas factory team. This team is only going to have one car next year, and currently for the Cup program, Cole Custer is the front runner for the seat. Haas will sponsor that seat, and Joe Custer obviously is the father of Cole Custer, so I do expect that Cole Custer is going to get the seat. My other expectation is for Xfinity is that Harrison Burton and Ryan Preece will likely get those rides. Maybe Haley Deegan, Matt Benedell being in the 4 camp, they could get a chance and an opportunity, or maybe Ty Majeski as well. But I do think with the Haas factory team, Cole Custer will end up getting the Cup Series seat, though Ryan Preece is also an option for this organization as well. Let's stay in the 4 camp and talk about Front Row Motorsports. We already know that Josh Berry and Noah Grayson are current candidates for Front Row. But 2 other names that have been mentioned as of recently is Christianekas and Sam Mayer, both part of the Chevrolet camp. Sam Mayer wants to move up to the Cup Series next year. I think of how well he's been doing this season, it would be really cool for him to get the chance and opportunity to move up. And I think Front Row would be a great option for him. So that is a possible option going into next year. Christianekas, his down performance in the Truck Series and how good he's been doing, he's been really one of the more underrated prospects coming up. I think he'd be a great option. With how much depth Chevy has right now, I just don't know if Sam Mayer can move up the Cup and be in a great team unless he goes to a team like Front Row. So I think that could be an option going into next year for both those guys. They're shocking candidates for Front Row. Let's move on to Legacy. Currently, John Hunter is signed through next year. Eric Jones has not signed a contract, and he's probably looking for better options going into next year. But if Eric Jones does return, there won't be any changes. If not, Corey Haim likely gets a seat. I don't think Eric Jones goes to another team. There aren't a lot of great options out there going into next year. So I do think more than likely Eric Jones is going to sign an extension with Legacy Motor Club. Moving on to Rick Ware Racing. The 15 car could be a multitude of drivers with sponsorship. Maybe Haley Deegan perhaps. Maybe Kaz Grall again. Maybe JJ Yeley. Maybe other drivers like Cody Ware as well could get that seat next year. Justin Haley, despite rumors of going to 2311 RFK, or a team like the Wood Brothers, he will stay with Rick Ware next year most likely. Justin Haley has a lot of talent. He brings funding to the table a little bit, and I think Justin Haley deserves to stay with Rick Ware. Rick gave him the chance and opportunity. I think he sticks around with the team going into 2025. Call Racing, already talked about them. Finally, let's talk about Harrison Burton. Harrison Burton, we know it's not going back to the Wood Brothers next year. It is expected that there are driver changes coming over at the Wood Brothers. We know Josh Berry is the most likely to take the seat. Harrison Burton, I think, goes back to the Xfinity Series in 2025 and drives for the Haas factory team and his teammates with Ryan Preece next season. There's other teams that we don't know about. JTG Doherty, we are expecting ownership change. Junior Motorsports can move up, but I don't know if that's going to happen. It's going to be very interesting to see how the rest of this NASCAR silly season plays out. But trust me, when all this stuff breaks, we'll talk about it here on this channel. So anyways, that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support my Patreon as well. Let's go more of that and comment your thoughts on today's episode. What are your thoughts about Bubba Wallace expected to return to 2311? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. And how do you think Connor Zilisch will do Junior Motorsports if he joins? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. There should not be any more videos dropping on the channel today. Tomorrow we're going to have entry list videos for Xfinity and Cup at Chicago. And if any major news breaks, talk about it here. Wednesday, NASCAR news video, and Xfinity Series race fix for Chicago. And Thursday, Cup race fix for Chicago. So anyways, like I said, one thing I was watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.